Firing Line with William F. Buckley, Jr.
Mr. Saul Alinsky, who was born in Chicago in 1909, has become sort of the pet revolutionary of the church people of America. His organization is called the Industrial Areas Foundation, and for a fee, a very modest fee, Mr. Alinsky will come to your town, as he has to 40 others, to organize the poor. That may mean an end to orderly traffic, it might mean sit-ins in City Hall, the cultivation of racial animosities, but Mr. Alinsky claims that's the way to get the toilets fixed in the slum buildings and to bring pride and a sense of dignity to the poor people, something like the sense of dignity which presumably Sitting Bull and his people felt after a massacre. Mr. Alinsky doesn't mind criticism at all. In fact, what he minds is when he isn't criticized. When he is criticized, he has written, then his influence, when he is criticized, then his influence grows among the people whom he desires to influence. He has been influencing people for a very long time, ever since he attended the University of Chicago, where he studied sociology and criminology. He first became famous as the co-founder of the Back of the Yards Neighborhood Council in Chicago. Since then, he started the Woodlawn organization, also in Chicago, the FIGHT Fight program in Rochester, New York, and numerous others. He desires the poor to rise up and reject middle-class values. I'd like to begin by asking Mr. Alinsky whether there is any substance in recent reports that his programs have proved, even by his own standards, generally unsuccessful.
No, that just doesn't so.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard those recent reports.
Are you aware of what Dr. Frank Reisman wrote in Dissent, a magazine?
Yes, if I may cut in.
So you have heard of some of the reports?
Oh, yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, that's about what you'll be limited to, with maybe one or two other individuals.
I have a few more, but go ahead.
All of them in the same category.
Are they? What category is Mr. Reisman in?
Well, he's in an interesting category. It's sort of a new research procedure where you do not contact the person that you're doing research on. You do not go into the projects. You do not talk to anyone associated with them. And you then come out with some statements which are so far removed from the fact that even my most bitter critics are too embarrassed to use those statements.
Except me.
Well, you haven't used them. You've just made a comment on it. I made a statement. I refused to debate with him, which only came up recently on the program, as a matter of fact, in New York City. And I made the remark that every time I see any of his stuff, it sort of makes me feel like a grizzled, battle-scarred dog going down the street while way back, a safe 6 blocks back or so, this little whining Pekingese comes out sniffing, yipping, and licking and growling of my leavings, and I'm not going to waste any time turning around.
You're not very nice to your critics, are you? But I gather you resent it when they're not very nice to you. You called Sergeant Shriver a political pornographer.
No, I didn't call him that.
Yes, you did.
No,
unless you were misquoted.
No, I wasn't. You're misquoting me at this moment.
Well, not intentionally.
I know that.
I'm quoting words assigned to you by Harper's Magazine.
No, I said that the poverty program was a prized piece of political pornography.
Well, okay.
Now, if you want to...
You take it from there.
Well, you take it from there.
Somebody has to write pornography.
Take it from there.
Somebody has to write pornography. For every Fanny Hill, there's a guy who wrote it.
Well, what I meant by that on the poverty program was if it's just a federal welfare program, which in fact it is, instead of being billed as a war on poverty, and if it didn't come out with all of these sanctimonious, hypocritical, moralistic trappings. And it wasn't in Harper's, but the reaction when I call it political pornography is, let's put it this way. I don't object to a minister or any religious representative getting up on the altar and giving a sermon against adultery, because I think that's part of his racket, and everybody sitting there assumes that. But when all the time, you know, he's in
Why
the
do you
hay
say
with
racket?
the organist.
Is this part of your racket to fight poverty? I mean, you're using racket in an invidious way?
No,
I
I'm
just
not.
want to know.
No, I'm
I mean,
not.
I see part of his profession,
Part of his
part of
profession.
his belief, part of his ideals.
That's
Okay.
right.
Go ahead, sorry.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, I want to be quite sure because a lot of people say that you're pretty anti-Christian, anti-dogma, and so on and so forth.
Anti-Christian?
That's what
No,
you
they don't call me anti-Christian. They say I'm sub-Christian.
Well, this is the editor of the Living Church magazine. I heard Mr. Alinsky speak at the convention. I had been told that he scoffs and sneers at Christianity. I came, I saw, I heard, and I concur.
No, well,
He didn't call you a sub-Christian. It would be very unchristian to call anybody a sub-Christian in any case, wouldn't it?
yes, but that's part of the
Yeah.
of the practices of many of those so-called practitioners. No, I'm not. Certainly, I'm not anti-Christian, and there are many others that you could quote the other way. But I raise these, shall I say, critical comments with reference to those who profess to be practicing. I get an emotional hang-up on hypocrisy. I don't mind sharp disagreements on policies and differences of opinions and programs, but it's when you get hypocrisy seasoned with sanctimoniousness that I start saying,
Well, don't you think that's true of everybody? I mean, who likes hypocrites? Do you know anybody who likes hypocrites?
Yeah, I see them around. At least they don't call them. They don't.
They don't go out of their way to criticize them.
They don't say you're being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
I'd like to make two corrections on your
Yes, sir.
on your introduction. One is we don't charge any fee, let alone a modest fee, for any services.
Well, I read the figure $100,000 from Rochester.
That's right, but those funds are spent right in the
I assume
community.
so, yeah.
As far as my salary, or as far as the foundation's
Well, Marshall
operation.
Field pays that, right?
Oh no, Marshfield hasn't paid anything since he
Used
since
to
he
pay that.
died about 15 years ago.
Oh, the old Marshall Field.
The old Marshfield.
Marshall Fields never die.
Well, that can be your hang-up. I'm not going to get into that one. But
But you have to make a living, obviously, and
well, we
should.
we make our own. We're like Sherman's Army. We live off the land. That's the price of our independence. We don't get foundation grants on it. We have teaching institutes in terms of many of the major religious denominations, and there is an intensive university lecturing schedule across the country, and consultations with various groups in different cities that we are not operating, but who want to know how to organize. But it's on that basis that our funds are raised. The funds that are charged, say in Rochester or Kansas City or Chicago, are spent in that community for organization.
Well, I think that you've touched on a point that's extremely interesting I'd like to develop, because you do have fascinating general notions. For instance, you said, I'll steal before I'll take charity.
You know,
Now, suppose I'm the person you're going to steal it from. Would you consult my feelings if I were to say to you before stealing from me, please won't you just take it? Or is it the act of stealing that gives you the satisfaction that you require?
of course not. You know better than that. It isn't the act of stealing.
Well,
I think
then it is charity. Why don't you take charity then?
Well, you know what I meant by charity, just going to getting welfare handouts and...
But welfare handouts are the product of
place,
philanthropy.
what
You see, it seems to me that
well,
your difficulty,
I don't... Well,
if I may be premature.
If you mean I have contradictions, of course I have. Life itself is just a constellation of
Not only that, you're very
contradictions.
cynical. I don't think you think you're what you are. You really assume the way pretty much the way
We'll
Ayn
interrupt
Rand does
briefly and
about
then return
sex,
to the
which
points
she
at
finds
issue.
only pleasurable if it's associated with the act of rape. Feel that only the exercise of power can get to you certain usufructs of life, and that therefore you must either take it from somebody because you will not permit that society to give it to you. Isn't that the meaning of your
No,
statement?
I think you're going off into a little verbalistic vortex on this business at this point. When I talk about power, and I'm using it strictly as it's defined in Webster's Unabridged as the ability to act, I'm saying that people do not get power except when they take it, or when they're strong enough so that the other side gives it up, or at least gives up its what would be a compromise arrangement. Compromise to me is not a dirty word. I think if I had to define the whole democratic process in one word, I would choose that word. As far as the little example you gave, which is so academic, in the first place, if you're going to steal anything from somebody, he isn't going to be around to say to you, why don't you
Sometimes
take
they
it?
are. It happens every day in New York. You know.
I read your column on that one.
Okay. Yeah, you say your money, your money
I
or
don't
your
think
life.
New
The
York
Jack Benny
quite-
says, well, I have to think it over. But they're often around, and in fact, you have that call it choice. But you do have a feeling. You said a moment ago just now that you only get power if you wrest it from
Yeah,
somebody.
well, you only get power as a reaction to a threat, I think.
But that's not true.
Oh, of course it is.
Suppose everybody in this room decided to nominate you as our leader. You would then have power over us. This doesn't mean that you wrested it from us.
If everybody in this room decided to nominate me as their leader, I wouldn't have any power to do anything.
It has nothing to do with it.
That's,
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? If we
I
pledged,
just-
if we
I just-
pledged
I
our
just- I'd
allegiance
have-
to you.
I'd have a bunch of kids and you. Well, your columns might be of some help for a while.
No, but suppose
But
you
that's
just.
all. I'm looking at it very pragmatically.
Suppose you were in a position to deploy us in any way that you chose, we having decided to give you that power. Why haven't we actually vouchsafed you something?
Well, in the first place, I have never taken that kind of power.
That's not a relevant answer. I'm trying to understand your philosophy here, and I find it difficult to do.
Well, do you want to understand my philosophy?
Desperately.
You do? Well, then, can you sort of be desperately silent for about 1 minute or 2 minutes? All right, I'll go with you on it.
3.
3. All right, as far as I'm concerned, living in the world as it is, you don't have the choice of what's best. Every judgment that is made on the basis of alternatives. On that basis, I find myself totally committed to the fact that a free and open, what we call, roughly speaking, a democratic society is the best way of life that we have. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm willing to buy the Churchill definition that it's a lousy way of life, but it's the best way that we know of. Now, I find, in terms of my own acceptance and understanding of our political situation, I find myself very much in agreement with the thinking of the early revolutionary leaders. I'm thinking of men like Madison J. Hamilton, etc., who I think were extraordinarily politically sophisticated and very well read and very thoughtful in terms of the implications of their actions, and very much aware of the fact that of the world that they were living in. It was not, and they weren't getting it mixed up with the world as they would like it to be. But that this was a jump-off point, that they were heading towards a future where mankind could always be improving or living a happier life, full of potentials for, and you find yourself drifting into cliches here, of achieving his own dignity, freedom, equality, etc. Now, the one thing that they were concerned about in this kind of a life is that while things would always be changing, that basically whatever future there was to the future of an open society, it rested in the fact of having as many people involved as citizens, being able to act as citizens, able to act power.
Freedom is participation in power, I agree, yeah.
All right. And that if we ever ran into a situation in this country where a large sector of our population was disenfranchised politically and economically, etc., and I'm not talking about equality in terms of equal income or anything else of that sort, but if we ever ran into that kind of situation, that it would very well become malignant and bring down the hopes for the future. As a matter of fact, de Tocqueville makes the same point on it in his speculations of future, this new way of life. Now, what is involved here is, and I have to answer you on 2 levels here. One is a commitment to the development of the combination of circumstances in those sectors of our society that are disenfranchised, whereby through organization, which is really a synonym for ability to act in this world, the only reason people ever organize, in fact, in order to be able to put things into practice, ideas that they have, in order to belong, in order to have the power to be part of the
To
body.
maximize their leverage, yeah.
Yeah. Or to get leverage to even begin with, where they don't have any.
You got leverage if you can vote.
Yeah,
Or if you can
but there
decide where
are
to buy
large
bread.
sectors of our population that weren't even able to vote.
You talking about Rochester?
No, I'm talking about Mississippi. I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about the South. I'm talking about the whole basis in many sectors of this country in terms of the civil rights revolution. You have to have that. You even have to have it, if I might digress for a moment, on the simple situation that, let's say, people are organized. You do not have that complex, that it's called a political complex, and I'm using political strictly in the Greek sense here, whereby through getting together, through having a convention, through having a election of officers, agreement on policies and so forth, that they can turn to other sectors of society and say, here are our representatives. These are the men for you to deal with in the democratic give and take and hauling, decision making, etc. Without this, which I think is a primary element in the democratic mix, the whole democratic society begins to founder. Let's take Detroit right after the riots that occurred. Let's assume that the powers that be deciding, as they did decide when they got together afterwards, we've got to deal with the representatives of the black ghettos. And they turn to the black ghettos and say, send us your representatives. Who's going to come forth? Unless the people are organized, you don't have that combination which produces legitimate, bona fide representation.
Well, sure. And in Chicago, they also dealt with Capone, as you know, having been very close to that situation. Your relationship, I hasten to say, was platonic, but
It was
you know.
non-participating.
That's right. And
We'll
it
rejoin
was
our
quite
debate after this brief pause.
Platonic, just not.
Nevertheless, you observed, and it is quite true that you have to deal through spokesmen if you want to deal with numbers of people. That's a social.
That's right. It's been the case since
truism.
1840. The other
Yeah.
point that comes in, and which I'd be interested in your reaction.
What happened in 1840?
We had too many people around to keep going on a town hall basis, except out on the western frontiers. The other thing that I'd like to bring up here is when you push me on reasons why, you're really asking me, and this is the kind of thing that a guy like Reisman or a number of these political illiterates are always coming up with as far as, I'm being very kind, actually. As a matter of fact, I'm being quite restrained. With reference to where are you going? What is your ideology? Well, the ideology in an organizer in a free society for a free society presents some real hang-ups on it, and I'd be interested in your reactions on it. Because an ideology, to begin with, to have an ideology, you've got to have possession of a prime truth. Now, a Marxist starts off, he's got possession of a prime truth. One, prime truth. All problems that we have in our society are due to the exploitation of the proletariat by the capitalists. So then the ideology begins. You come to stage two, obviously, you get rid of the capitalists. Since they will not voluntarily cooperate and abdicate, you have what is known as a revolution. Stage three, dictatorship of the proletariat and reorganizing the society. Stage four, paradise on earth, communism. Any good Catholic Jesuit can get up here and give you the Catholic ideology. You start off with the prime truth. One, the acceptance of the divinity of Christ. And you lead from there on. My problem, and the problem of any organizer in a free society for an open society, is one, he doesn't have a prime truth. Truth is relative and changing. And not having that prime truth to begin with, not having the reason for all the illnesses such as a Marxist has, he doesn't have the formula or the prescription, the answers. All that he can do in this situation is to simply assume one article of faith, and that is if the people have power as citizens, that they will meet each particular crisis and each particular issue as it comes along, and you cannot predict what they're going to be, so that you don't have a neat packaged political prescription.
Well, I'm not asking you for a neat packaged political. I rejoice that you don't have one. I tend like you to distrust those who do. I'm talking about, of course, about temporal rather than spiritual matters, although I think we should at least acknowledge that you begin, for instance, by believing that the democratic way tends to make most sense of any of the visible alternatives.
That's
a
right.
proposition with which I happen to agree, though I hope you won't now call me an ideologist in the sense that you have been condemning ideologists for that reason. But I think what's most interesting about yourself, at least most people, is this distinctive appeal that you have to certain types of people who recognize that there is a problem of the poor. Now, you appeal to some of them because you have this disdain for welfarism, as suggested by that ultimatum of yours that you rather steal than receive welfare. Now, this appeals to a lot of people sort of conservative-minded who are against welfare because they do believe that there is going on in this country a sort of institutionalization of welfare, that we ought to get out of it, and that to be essentially human, you've got to make your own way. So you appeal to them. On the other hand, you appeal, they would be conservatives in a way, you appeal also to liberals and radicals because yours is a highly non-rhetorical approach. You actually want to organize the poor, and you want to cause them to demand things. And you seem to be utterly either unconscious, or if not unconscious, at least insensible to the normal niceties of approach. When you want something, you simply want it.
It isn't my wanting.
Well, when you figure out they want it, yeah. Now, for instance, you were perfectly prepared, as I understand it, to close down City Hall a while ago in Chicago. Just send wave after wave of people there just to close it down. Just make it impossible for the mayor to go in or the mayor to go out, or the sheriff to go in, the sheriff to go out. And
I've been involved in so many of these things, I'm trying to remember which one that was.
Woodlawn, yeah. And you're perfectly prepared to cause a tremendous amount of commotion out in the suburban areas where landlords live, so as to force the neighbors, as you put it, themselves to put pressure on the delinquent landlords to make those reforms.
Well, it was pure pragmatism, because people only do the right things for the wrong reasons. And I wanted to get the white neighbors to put the pressure on their white slum landlord in order to get rid of the Negro pickets that were in the community. They weren't doing it for equality.
Yeah, that's once again, it seems to me that you obtrude into the discussion your own essential cynicism.
That's not cynicism, that's realism.
No, it isn't.
No,
it isn't.
Come
no,
on.
I know a lot of people do things they don't want to do at all. And they do them simply because they think it's the right thing to do. I'll introduce you to some, if you like, later on.
Are they all conservative?
No, they're of every stripe. A lot of them are liberals, some of them are radicals, some of them are communists. But you say, for instance, and I think this may be at least it's the most interesting thing I've ever seen you say. My own reaction to it was most interesting. You say, I've been asked why I never talked to a Catholic priest or a Protestant minister or a rabbi in terms of the Judeo-Christian ethic or the Ten Commandments or the Sermon on the Mount. I never talk in those terms. Instead, I approach them on the basis of their own self-interest, of the welfare of their church, even its physical property. And you go on to say, the most important lesson is that people don't get opportunity or freedom or equality or dignity as a gift or an act of charity. They only get those things in the act of taking them through their own efforts. Now, it seems to me that my experience and that of others...
There.
Excuse me?
You left out a very important line.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to. What was it?
I said I did not approach ministers, priests, or rabbis on the basis of Judeo-Christian moral principles, because to do so would be to go outside of their experience. They wouldn't know what I was talking about.
Well, that there again, you're compounding your cynicism. I assume that there exists somewhere in the world a rabbi
sure, there
who
are
doesn't
plenty
consider
of them.
himself anti-Jewish,
But don't you see that?
or a Christian who doesn't consider...
But don't you see in the field of action you're compelled to polarize?
Well, I'm not compelled to polarize, and I don't see why you should.
Well, you're sitting on a television
I know.
show.
No,
I'm
but
down there organizing.
Yeah.
Look, let me...
But you see, you're saying, for instance, that the Sermon on the Mount cannot have any direct experience on people. I'm disputing this. I think that Billy Graham probably has done more good than you have for poor people. And the reason he has is because it seems to me that the spiritual side of man is that which makes man most important of all.
No.
And that for somebody to stimulate the spiritual faculty is somebody who's going to do that man most good in the long run. Now, obviously, he's got to start by getting bread and roofs.
No.
But you, it seems to me, by your cynical approach...
Cynical?
Yeah,
You keep
yeah.
coming
You're very
back
much
to
like
that
Ayn
word.
Rand, you see.
Well, that's not so.
Only that which I can personally get belongs to me, and nobody's going to help me to get it. I think that America, viewed as a nation, is the most humane nation in the experience of the world. I think there's more genuine concern for the poor, for the underprivileged, for the weak in America than we've ever seen in the history of the world. And I see you trying to fire and establish and disestablish the order that made that possible.
You had a line in your introduction that I raised racial animosity.
Yes, I certainly do.
Do you think when I go into a black ghetto, upon their invitation, incidentally, never go in uninvited? Because we're not a colonial operation, going in like so many other sectors of society. We're going to do this for you whether you like it or not. Do you think that I go in and say, look, I want all of you to know something. Do you know that you're being segregated? Do you know that you're being discriminated against? Do you know all these things that white society is doing to you? How can you give me that kind of hogwash?
Yeah, because you say that they know it anyway. That's your line, isn't it?
They know it anyway.
Yeah, right.
And
but,
you're looking at me saying that? Saying that that's my line, isn't it?
I am saying that a lot of people tend to believe about their own condition that which they are told. There are people in Russia who believe they are free because they're told they're free. And if you tell the Negro people of this country that they don't have any opportunity, they don't have any freedom, that they don't have any dignity, you're telling them A, something that isn't so, but B, you are inviting them to hate, as your deputy, Minister Florence, hates the white race. He wears a black power badge. Yeah.
You don't think they hate before I come in there?
I know a tremendous number of people are poor who don't hate. I even know rich people who don't hate. I even know people who don't hate you, which is a greater act of.
Now, Buckley, if you'd been around,
We'll expand further on these and other points under discussion in just a moment.
Madison J. and all the rest of them. This independence thing, we're starting to get certain concessions over there.
Are you in favor of war when negotiation might possibly do the trick?
No, but I'm saying that you're turning that.
No.
Sure you are.
We might have negotiated our own freedom from the English, might we not?
But do you think that that the blacks of this country are going to sit around waiting for this mythical love charity business that you're talking about?
I think that the blacks in this country have friends. And they have people who think of themselves as friends, but who aren't. I think people like Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown do a great deal of harm, and I think that you have done less harm, but that you have done some harm.
Well,
curiously, this is a harm that you don't do to people simply because they're Negro. You do them to anybody who buys your philosophy. Mm-hmm. Your philosophy is really sort of solipsistic. The people, you just exist. And only that which you see exists, only that which you take is yours, only that power which you exercise is exercisable. And I think this is a pretty distressing philosophy.
Well, that's an aborted oversimplification. It's very warped.
Aborted?
That's right, because it's much more than that. You're not going to get men, including many religious leaders, including certainly a personage like Jacques Maritain wouldn't be buying an approach and be approving of it on the basis which you have just propounded.
I know. He views it differently. He views a lot of things differently. And I don't think you want to summon Mark as an authority.
When you say it's bad,
yeah.
What was bad about Woodlawn?
Well, it seems to me...
Do you know what happened down there?
Yeah. Well, assuming it wasn't incorrectly reported. I mean, I read 15,000 words in commentary about what happened there. Can I proceed to discuss that?
Sure.
That wasn't misquotation. Yeah.
No, that wasn't.
And it was done by somebody very enthusiastic about you, as you know.
Yeah, and from a left-wing magazine.
Correct. Yeah. Now, it seems to me that what's wrong with Woodlawn is the same thing generally that's wrong with, for instance, great marches on Washington. What's wrong is that it is a way of achieving power which breaks down the structure of process. Now, you can say to hell with process, I can't eat process. This is what they usually say at this turn in the discussion.
Well, no, but what do you mean it broke down process?
Well, but what I mean is that when you say, look, this is the program of things we want, and if you don't give it to us, we're going to make it impossible for Chicago to continue, to have any commercial or civic life at all. The sit-ins at City Hall, the traffic tie-ups and the rest of it. This is vintage Alinsky, isn't it?
No, that's old vintage. No, proxies are more the vintage of Alinsky now.
You mean this is you reject the methods used in Woodlawn?
Well, I reject them for a very simple reason, because they're no longer effective. A tactic which isn't effective is no longer even a tactic.
I see.
Now we're involved, we're involved in a whole modern corporate economy, and you've got to deal on a whole different level.
Is this something happened since 1960?
Yeah, it's happened the last couple of years. The Eastman Kodak fracas was an example of it on the proxy fight.
Should we talk about that?
I don't care what we talk about, but let me suggest this before you get away from it. That before Woodlawn, on the so-called mystical process you're talking about, you had a large mass, about 100,000 Negroes, who were just a rootless, floating, disenfranchised group of people who had been under urban renewal. Many of them were 2 and 3 times over fugitives from bulldozers. They were utterly demoralized. They were on the verge of being bulldozed again out into another slum. As a consequence of their own organization and what they have done through the power of their own activities, they today are in full command of their own urban renewal program. Not only that, the city and the government both agreed that they were to be their own developers, which means that they can turn to the building trades unions, which are notoriously segregated, and say, unless you integrate, you will not be employed on these projects.
Tremendous. I think
It is a tremendous
that's
breakthrough.
superb, yeah.
And I could give you all kinds of what happened in terms of education of people within, so that today even the University of Chicago, which at that time, my alma mater, which was a bitter adversary, is one of the staunchest allies of the whole Woodlawn organization. Do you know that?
No, and I'm delighted to hear it, because I know that you were very critical and assumed that they would never come around to their senses.
No, but this is
sufficiently.
during the stage of conflict, and I
Yeah.
suppose you would call that cynical.
Well,
when you
no,
have to
there
polarize.
again, you say that conflict precedes any progress at all. As a matter of fact, I think you said that the difference between the radical and the liberal is the difference between the man who believes that revolution, a series of revolutions, are necessary to making any progress.
No, I said the difference between a liberal and a radical is that the liberal is the guy who walks out of the room when the argument turns into a fight. And on the other thing that you were talking about, on revolutions, I said that revolution is primarily, I put it the other way. I said that evolution is a chronological term used by non-participating historians to denote a time sequence of a whole series of revolutions which synthesize into a
Yes, of
major
course,
change.
yeah.
Then they call it evolution.
Yeah. Can I quote you exactly? Quote: "There is no evolution without revolution, and there are no revolutions without conflict, and this is the line which separates liberals from radicals."
Where'd you get that from?
Harper's.
All right.
I'll show it to you after if you like.
No,
The,
I'll buy it.
Yeah. Now, isn't this once again one more expression of your belief that what progress is made by some sort of a Hegelian sense of controversy, conflict, antithesis, and so on? You just finished discussing the fact
Yeah.
that there exists in Chicago now something that is substantially better than was there 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you say, don't you understand, the reason it came into being was because of the Woodlawn operation. And sure, the Woodlawn operation involved conflict. It necessarily had to. And I'm asking whether or not progress can't be made without a
No,
conflict.
I don't believe so. I think that the most insidious, the most subversive force that has ever entered the American scene has been what I would call Madison Avenue public relations, middle-class moral hygiene, which has made the word conflict a nasty word, and controversy a very nasty word, so that people are fired off of mass media for
Well,
controversy.
but don't you think that reason? Well, I obviously I have a stake in the toleration of controversy, but I want to ask you this: can't one achieve progress by reason, or must it be by a conflict of force?
Even
or
on the
forces?
basis of reason, the moment you come up with a new idea, it promptly challenges the prevailing sacred cow of the older idea, and you've got a conflict going on. I think that controversy is a matrix of everything creative that comes out of life.
Well, but then the question is what you consider controversy. For instance,
Well,
is a debate in Congress controversy in the sense that you're talking about? Because there are those.
Controversy ranges. It ranges all through various levels of life. I would consider, for example, the same thing on revolution. I think Social Security was revolutionary.
Yeah.
I think Medicare was revolutionary. You see, the problem is that
But
every
then
time...
we simply have a semantic difficulty.
all words in the whole arena of action are all loaded.
Our debate on these varied issues will continue after this brief pause.
Gets an idea of blood and When they say powered, it's a sinister word, you know.
But for instance, we got Medicare in this country, and we got it as a result of a lot of discussion. Now, mightn't Alinsky students have felt that you'd need to shoot a few doctors or let a few people die for lack of medical attention before you'd have the kind of conflict that's necessary to midwife Medicare? And I'm asking, why
Buckley,
can't you
I've been
have...
fascinated by your eyes in previous shows I've watched. Now, will you look at me and tell me whether you believe what you're saying?
Well, of course, no. What I'm trying to do is extract from you disbelief in what people understand you to be believing. Perhaps because I'm terribly refreshed that you're constantly shocked that people at quotations I throw at you of things you've said.
I'm not shocked.
I'm delighted.
No, I'm
This shows great
I'm
progress.
just correcting some of the misquotations.
And all right, if you're saying therefore that conflict is what we're doing right now, then I agree with you that conflict is probably necessary to the changing of any point of view. But most people understand you to be saying something much more
Yeah, and
sticky.
what their understanding is closer to it than just our discussion. I don't want to get take a pass on.
Yeah.
I'm saying very unreservedly that all progress comes as a response to a threat, and the reaction to the threat is when you get progress. I'm saying that that all actions of history have come that way.
That's
it
not
doesn't
true.
necessarily have to be violence.
Why? But that's
Well-
not true. What was the threat? What is the relevant threat, let's
Go
say,
ahead.
when John decides to marry Jane? Loneliness, if he doesn't, you mean in that sense? But then you're reducing threat also to a state
Well,
of
some
utter
people might say a
meaninglessness.
suicidal desire too.
Well, then I see. Okay,
Let's
understand.
not get into
In
that.
other
one.
words, this is simply your lingo here.
No. Let me put it to you this way. On your basis of reason, can you imagine a labor organizer coming into an employer and saying, and I'm now quoting some of the criticisms against me from a representative from the Joint Center up in Cambridge, saying that I represent a negative approach as over against a positive approach. I represent negative conflict vis-a-vis positive mutual search for cooperative common good.
Right.
So I come into you, you're an employer, and I am a literate labor organizer and believing devoutly in the act of reason, etc. And I say to you, particularly if you're General Motors or any one of the employers, now look, I don't want to go in and start organizing your people, and of course I'll have to polarize this and make you a villain, and there's going to be all kinds of conflict and strike threats and so on until you recognize a union here and you sit down and negotiate a contract with us. Why don't we, as rational men committed to reason, why don't we sit down and in our mutual search for the common good, you give me a contract recognizing a labor union here. You know what you're going to do on the basis of rational reason?
No.
You're going to call Bellevue and have them pick me up and go over there for a spinal test. You know that.
No.
Come on.
I'm going to say this is simply a technique of clever old Alinsky.
And you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. So I'm going to have to go down there and organize.
I'm going to say that you're going to have to convince me that it is for the good of everyone involved that they should be unionized.
You know any other way I'm going to be able to convince you?
Well, I'm convinced by things all the time. I read books. I hear people talk. You see.
You know exactly.
No.
what I'm talking
You have
about.
a very sort of Darwinistic view of how things happen.
Darwinistic.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of progress made because you eat the weak ones and the weak ones eat the weaker ones and so on and so forth.
No.
I just don't think. I don't think America works that way. But it seems to me just to
you're
round
getting off the level. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Do you know of any other way I can convince them?
Look. I believe in the essentials of capitalism, and you can say there's a certain amount of conflict involved there. Your dilemma that you posed to me a moment ago is another way of saying, what does the marketplace decide in a situation like that? And the marketplace decides that force majeure is force majeure, and you have to yield to it. The answer is, if I don't have to yield on a point I disapprove of, then I won't. If I'm made to yield, then I will, even if I disapprove of it. But I don't see this is to add anything new to the discussion, provided you don't go so far and say, this what's more is a philosophy of life. Because the answer is, I think that many more people are convinced, not by actions of power, but by the precepts of people they listen to, and by some sort of an internal
All
search
right,
to do the right
let's,
thing.
let's talk about it for a moment. Ever since the Civil War, and before that, I'm not even going to take the period of slavery in, this is a Christian, Western civilized nation. They've constantly been talking about the fact that the mystical body of Christ knows no color line. They go to church and they hear all this in nice segregated churches. And on a rational basis, all the anthropologists have come up with their various findings, cutting across through this color barrier, etc. Do you think that there would have been any change as far as civil rights legislation, as far as many of the breakthroughs that have occurred?
Of course.
Oh, well, come on. I don't know what fairyland you're living in. If you call me a
America,
senator...
that's my fairyland, the country you don't know. Let me tell you that there was a tremendous amount of change during the preceding 10, 15, 20,
I don't know.
30 years.
You know the kind of America you're
United
living
States.
in? It really is a fairyland. When you tell me that Billy Graham has had any effect on the poor of America...
He has. There are poor people who will tell you that their lives have been changed by Billy Graham. Their lives have been changed to the point that they cease having such a materialistic fixation as you tend to have when you view the country around you. The whole purpose...
A poor person ceases to have such a materialistic fixation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Look, I came out of the poor.
I know you did. You did
All
very
right.
successfully.
And I'll accept that one.
Yeah, you're a very bright man, and America made it possible in part.
Yeah, but let me tell you something, that I found very little businesses on cockroaches and rats and everything else living back of a store and so on with anything that Billy Graham would have been preaching on it. If you call that a materialistic fixation, trying to get away from cockroaches,
I'm sure Billy Graham would try to get away from cockroaches, too.
I'm sure he would.
My only point is that having got away from the cockroaches, what then do you do?
I don't think he's done a damn thing as far as the liberation that is now coming among the black Americans.
Well, I think, well, first of all, we're not talking exclusively about black Americans, we're talking about people. Even if they're not black, they deserve your own consideration occasionally, you get it. And it seems to me that these people understand that there is a component in living which you tend to ignore.
I don't
the
ignore
spiritual
it.
component.
I don't ignore that spiritual
Oh,
component.
you make fun of it. You think it's a kind of a laugh, don't you?
I don't, because...
And you especially love having the priests and the rabbis and the
No,
ministers.
you know why I don't ignore it?
Why?
It's very important that I don't, because if you're fighting for free open society, you're fighting for free open society for people, and if you're fighting for people and with people, you're fighting for certain values. Certain values at the very top of the hierarchy. I wouldn't go into a community and organize it. If they were to say to me, we want you in, we're inviting you in, we're funding this organizational program, and as a consequence of the organization, they say democratically, we have voted 99-1, let's say it's a southern white community, for segregation, and that's the democratic way. I would say to them that is not the democratic way, and I'm coming in to fight you on it. Because the democratic way includes certain of these high values, and that's the purpose of it. And those values are the Judeo-Christian moral principles that are involved here. You're confusing one with the other in terms of those who profess to practice it. Those are the ones I've been after, not the values, not the spiritual life that you're talking about.
Your whole approach seems
We'll
to
interrupt
me
briefly
to
and then
be,
rejoin our participants in this
directed
interesting
on
discussion.
The assumption that the spirit. It may be that you simply
Aren't
view.
the churches saying that themselves? Aren't they saying when...
Some are, but
Isn't the big question today no longer is there life after death, but really is there life after birth?
that sounds like something
don't
Ted
tell me.
Sorensen would have written.
No, it comes off a button.
Is it?
One of those
I didn't know
buttons,
that. I
yeah.
didn't know. Well, maybe.
I mean, the last part of it.
Maybe he
but it's not the-
bohemianizes after hours.
Oh, wait a minute. But it's not the kind of button that would makes anybody laugh in the black ghettos, because that is actually a basic question of life.
Well,
Look, in all the ghettos I've been in, I don't know that I can't see anything. I can't even see one cockroach that turned over dead on the basis of any of Billy Graham's exhortations on this particular level.
look, if I may say so, that's a pretty vulgar observation, because
Well,
Billy Graham is not the apostle of a faith that says pray for the elimination of cockroaches, and that shall be done unto you. It is more or less generally assumed that however fervent a believer you are, you got to kill your own cockroaches and do certain things yourself. But you do have a view of society which is at least distinctive. For instance, in 1965, what you were most worrying about was the John Birch Society. Now, let's not underestimate this operation. You said 1965, it's growing. In this way, it is a consequence of the bomb. I'll spare you the rest.
What are you quoting from now?
Harper's. And, yes.
You really read those, didn't you?
Somebody, I read everything, yeah. Can't you tell?
No, I'll tell you why I say I can't tell. I was wondering whether you ever got around to reading...
Not the book that was promised for 1966, but hasn't yet been published. I haven't read that yet.
No, I'm going to hear about that tonight with Random House. Did you get around reading that last Auburn lecture I gave Junior Theological of Means and Ends?
No, I'd like very much to have it. Especially, I'm very interested on you in Means and Ends. Yeah.
I thought that was sent to you.
Yeah. But you don't think the John Birch Society is a great threat now, do you? Especially since it isn't growing, since when you said that it...
Isn't it growing?
No, sir.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Do you have definite information on it?
Wall Street Journal. And of course they have a...
Well, you have your own pipelines in that direction, haven't you? You've got better reliance than I have.
Oh, much better, yeah. So perhaps before you say anything about the John Birch Society in the future, you'll consult me.
I'll be glad to.
Let's have some questions. Yes, sir. Who has a mic?
I'd like to address my question to Mr. Alinsky. Sir, in your speech, you referred many times to the revolutionary period in American history.
Which speech are you talking about?
Well, in the discussion that's been carried on thus far. Now, with that in mind, sir, do you consider the present time another revolutionary period? And if you do you consider violence just may be a means to your ends?
Yes, I do consider this a very definite revolutionary period because it's a period of enormous change. I have always said that I am opposed to violence unless it is the only possible recourse that a person has for life itself, literally. And by life itself, I mean equality and dignity and
Our time has just about run out. Our thanks now to Mr. Alinsky and Mr. Buckley and students at St. John's University.
with the resistance movement under the Third Reich.